Look, I'm not saying I meant to destabilize a 2,700-year-old civilization. I was just trying to avoid getting killed at a sporting event. 6 months later, standing in the ancestral chamber on Zephyros, with my hands wrapped around the grip of the Graviton Maul, I still couldn't quite believe the trajectory. The weapon felt warm under my palms. Not metaphorically warm, actually warm, like it was responding to something in my nervous system that it wasn't designed to recognize. Kayla stood beside me, her sapphire skin catching the light from the twin suns filtering through the crystalline ceiling. She was 6'3" of precisely calibrated muscle and controlled intensity, and when she looked at me with those golden eyes, I still felt the same disorientation I'd experienced the first time our gazes met across the arena floor. "Are you going to lift it?" she asked. The Maul's handle was wrapped in biosynthetic leather that had absorbed the sweat of champions across 723 tournament cycles. The head was forged from collapsed matter alloy, iridescent blue-black, with a core that hummed at frequencies just below human hearing range. 294 kilograms of engineered superiority. I lifted it one-handed, effortless, the same way I'd lifted it 8 days after meeting her for the first time. 8 days. That's how long it took to dismantle everything her species believed about strength, power, and their place in the galactic hierarchy. 8 days from first contact to the moment we stood hand in hand in the center of an arena, refusing to give the watching trillions the victory they expected. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the beginning, to the moment I realized I'd accidentally become the most dangerous human in the galaxy simply by being good at my job. Day 1, the celestial apex arena occupied 3 interconnected orbital platforms above Helix 7 station, suspended in the gravity well of a gas giant that blazed orange and cream against the black. The observation galleries could house 2.6 trillion spectators across holographic feeds spanning 47 star systems. I stood in the human delegation's prep chamber, watching Earth recede to a blue-white marble through the reinforced viewport, and tried to keep my breathing steady. Director Isla Torrens leaned against the polished titanium wall, her gray-streaked hair pulled back in a tight bun that emphasized the weathered lines around her eyes. Former military current diplomat perpetually exhausted by the weight of representing humanity's desperation to a galaxy that viewed us as interesting newcomers, at best exploitable resources at worst. "You understand what you're walking into, Veldrin." Her voice carried the rough edge of someone who'd spent too many years breathing recycled station air. "You're not competing, you're a symbol. We lose every event humanity maintains dignity and negotiating position. We win even one category, the cartel prices us out of the lithium contracts we need for Kepler 442b colony expansion." I turned from the viewport, 32 years old hands still bearing the calluses and minor scars from structural engineering work on Encelada Station. My dark hair needed cutting, my uniform fit awkwardly across shoulders that were built for maneuvering in microgravity, and I had absolutely no illusions about why I was here. "Then I'll lose," I said simply. The preliminary strength trials were non-elimination rounds designed to establish baseline capability across species: gravity tolerance, leverage, efficiency, sustained force application, grip, strength, standard metrics that had been refined over 7 centuries of tournaments. I was supposed to perform respectably, place somewhere in the middle third, and disappear into the statistical background. That was the plan. Torrens continued as if I hadn't spoken, her gray eyes tracking me with the assessment of someone who'd learned to read people in combat zones. "Our combat specialist suffered catastrophic neural injury 72 hours before departure. You were pulled from Enceladus because you're mid-level enough not to create diplomatic incident if you're eliminated, and because your military service record showed basic hand-to-hand competency. That's it. That's your qualification for representing Earth at the most politically significant athletic event in galactic history." "Comforting," I said. The sarcasm was automatic, a defense mechanism I'd developed during 4 years of active service before transitioning to engineering work. She didn't smile. "Tournament cycle 723. 38 species competing. Earth has petitioned for entry for 7 years. The Vexarii-led cartel controls 81% of trans-Neptunian mining operations. We need rare Earth access or our outer colonies fail. Not slow down, fail. 30 million people dependent on resource chains we don't control." The weight of that settled over me like the gravity increase I'd felt when the transport descended toward Helix 7. 30 million lives reduced to a political calculation about whether I could lose a strength test without embarrassing my species. The opening ceremony began 3 hours later. I filed into the amphitheater with 37 other competitors, each representing the peak physical capability of their evolutionary path. The Vexarii warrior moved with the coiled precision of a natural predator, all lean muscle and sharp angles. The Turellian competitor was massive 8 feet of dense tissue that had evolved under gravity 30% higher than Earth standard. There were beings made of crystallized silicon matrices, gaseous formations contained in bioelectric fields, and at least 3 species whose biology I couldn't even begin to categorize. Then Caliph entered and the arena noise shifted. She wore ceremonial armor in dark metal and bronze intricate but clearly functional. Her sapphire skin seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, creating an impression of depth and substance that made her look solid in a way that transcended mere physicality. Her eyes were almond-shaped, enormous with golden irises that caught the amphitheater's lighting arrays with an almost predatory gleam. Her dark hair was braided into multiple intricate plaits, each secured with clasps that bore the dual moon crest of her homeworld. She moved across the arena floor with the measured stride of someone who understood she was being watched by billions, and in her hands she carried the graviton maul. Even from the competitor staging area, I could feel something about that weapon, a weight that existed in more than 3 dimensions. The head was massive, forged from an alloy I couldn't identify from this distance, dark iridescent blue, with patterns that seemed to shift in the light. The handle looked almost organic, wrapped in material that had been worn smooth by centuries of use. Caliph raised it one-handed arm, fully extended, and the crowd's response was nearly overwhelming. The neutral arbiter's voice carried across all frequencies, simultaneously a sound that resonated in my chest cavity despite the distance. The being was ancient crystalline, its form shifting between states of matter in ways that hurt to look at directly. The graviton maul, symbol of strength and superiority across 723 tournament cycles. In all recorded history, no competitor from any species has lifted this weapon from its resting position. The champion who claims this symbol claims their place as the strongest among the assembled species. Caliph's golden eyes swept across the amphitheater with absolute confidence. When her gaze passed across the human delegation section, I felt something tighten in my chest. Her expression didn't change, but there was a moment, brief, almost imperceptible, where her eyes seemed to focus on me specifically. Then she was looking elsewhere, and I told myself it meant nothing. My training kicked in analyzing the physics. The way she held the maul, the angle of her wrist, the subtle shift in her center of gravity to compensate for the weight. Something about the physics wasn't quite right. The center of mass should have been closer to the head, but her grip suggested the weight was more evenly distributed than the visual proportions indicated. Interesting. The preliminary trials began the next morning. I arrived at the secondary arena at dawn cycle, joining 17 other competitors in the staging area. The testing moved through species by galactic registration order, which placed humanity mid-morning in the queue. I watched the competitors ahead of me move through 5 standardized stations. The Vexarii warrior, all predatory grace and efficient violence, exceeded baseline strength by 43%. The Turellian, moving with the ponderous power of their high-gravity evolution, exceeded baseline by 61%. A reptilian species whose name I couldn't pronounce managed 74% above baseline. None of them approached the graviton maul. The maul wasn't part of preliminary testing. It sat in the observation gallery like a promise or a threat, depending on your perspective. Station 1 gravity chamber. Progressive resistance while standing in 1.3 times Earth's standard gravity. I managed 69% above baseline. Respectable. The Vexarii had done 71. Nothing exceptional. Station 2 leverage test. Pressing a resistance beam from chest height to full overhead extension against increasing weight. I completed 87 repetitions before my muscles reached failure threshold. Nearly double the Vexarii's count, but I pushed that observation away. 1 station. Meaningless. Station 3, sustained pulling force. A resistance apparatus measured continuous downward pressure against upward resistance. I achieved 94 sustained pulls. The Turellian had managed 89 despite their superior muscle density. I was beginning to feel something unfamiliar. Concerned that I was performing too well. Station 4 grip strength. My hands weathered from years handling structural materials on Enceladus, accustomed to precision pressure work, with tools and microgravity exceeded baseline by 117%. The testing official, being composed of swirling gaseous formation within a containment field, noted this with an expression I couldn't interpret. Then came Station 5. The graviton replica sat on a reinforced pedestal, identical in composition and measured weight to the ceremonial maul. Competitors had to lift it from shoulder height to full overhead extension, sustaining the position for 10 seconds minimum. The Vex Arii managed it with visible strain, trembling through the 10-second count. The Turellian failed entirely, unable to raise the replica past chest level despite their superior mass. The reptilian species achieved overhead position, but lost control after 4 seconds, the replica crashing to the padded floor with a sound like a contained thunderstorm. I approached the pedestal. The replica's handle fit my grip as if it had been calibrated for human hand structure, despite being designed for species with different anatomical configurations. The weight registered as approximately 294 kilograms. Heavy, very heavy, but not impossible. Not for someone whose musculature had developed through 12 years of practical structural work in varying gravity conditions. I lifted it smoothly, shoulder height to overhead extension in one fluid motion. My arm fully extended above my head, the replica held one-handed in a grip that felt natural, comfortable even. I could feel the weight, could feel my muscles engaged, my shoulder joint compressed, my core activated to maintain balance. But there was no strain in it, no trembling, no countdown in my head marking the seconds until failure. 10 seconds, 20, 30, 40. 12 years of structural work took over analyzing the weight distribution even as I held it. The harmonic resonance in the handle's subtle vibrations at frequencies just below tactile perception. The way the core seemed to generate its own electromagnetic field, barely detectable but present. The testing officials signaled me to lower it. I did, setting it down gently on the pedestal. That exceeds baseline by 487%. The gaseous being stated flatly. The result requires verification. The arena went silent. I stood there still feeling the phantom weight in my shoulder and watched as the entire political calculation shifted around me. The other competitors in the staging area had fallen silent, their attention locked on me with expressions ranging from confusion to something that looked uncomfortably like fear. The testing official communicated through frequencies outside my hearing range, but I could read the urgency in the way their containment field pulsed and shifted. "We will conduct redundant testing," they announced. "Veldrin Marcus, human delegation. Please proceed to verification chamber 3. That's when I understood that something fundamental had just changed. That the plan to lose gracefully had encountered an unforeseen variable. That my hands, my shoulders, my engineering, conditioned musculature had just accidentally threatened the economic foundation of 47 star systems. The verification chamber was isolated, windowless, with only the official and 2 additional observers present. I repeated the lift 6 times. The results were identical each time, 487% above projected baseline. One-handed lifts, no apparent strain, my heart rate barely elevated. One observer, a being made entirely of crystallized silicon with fractal patterns running through their structure, spoke in harmonics that my translation implant rendered as careful precision. "Your species' physiological database manifests unexpected efficiency in leverage mechanization. Muscle fiber density distribution exceeds established parameters for Earth standard gravity evolution. This suggests either genetic modification or falsified baseline data in your species registration profile." I looked at the crystalline being, then at the gaseous official, then at the third observer, something that appeared to be a mobile plant colony with distributed neural tissue. "I'm a structural engineer," I said carefully. "I spent 12 years on Enceladus Station working with the materials in 0.11 G environments. I'm accustomed to manual handling of components in variable gravity, precision pressure application, force vector optimization. Manual labor does not account for 487% enhancement beyond projected capability," the gaseous official responded. Their containment field pulsed a deep orange that my implant couldn't translate. "Your species' genetic profile requires immediate review. These results will be submitted to the Tournament Integrity Committee. You will be notified of implications for competition advancement." I was escorted from the verification chamber as testing continued with the next competitor. I returned to the human delegation quarters and found Director Torrens waiting, her expression somewhere between panic and calculation. "What the hell did you do in that arena, Veldrin?" "I lifted the test weight," I said. "They asked me to lift it one-handed. I did." She pulled up holographic displays on the chamber wall, data cascading in columns of light. "You exceeded projected baseline by 487%. Marcus, the highest previous human strength test in any galactic competition was 139%. You're 3.5 times that. The entire galactic feed is running analysis models. The cartel's representatives are in emergency economic sessions. We've received 7 separate trade negotiation cancellation notices in the last 90 minutes. The truth hit me then. Not because of the numbers or the explanations, but because of the fear in her voice. Earth had made a fundamental error by sending me. I was supposed to be invisible, unremarkable. Instead, I had accidentally demonstrated capability that threatened established hierarchies built on 7 centuries of carefully maintained superiority. The neutral arbiter is convening a review committee. Torrens continued, her hands moving through the holographic data with increasing agitation. Your results have to be validated or contested. Marcus, if your performance stands as legitimate, we're no longer competing for recognition in this tournament. We're competing for survival. The species whose economic models depend on resource monopolies cannot afford to have Earth represented by a competitor who exceeds their established capability metrics. I sat down on the nearest seat, feeling the weight of 30 million lives settling back onto my shoulders. Different weight than the replica mall. Heavier in ways that had nothing to do with kilograms or force vectors. I can't unlift it, I said quietly. I know. She deactivated the displays in the room to return to standard lighting. The moment has been recorded. 2.6 trillion beings witnessed it. And across this station and chambers, both public and private species are beginning to recalculate what they believed about human potential. What Torrens didn't know, what I didn't know yet, was that in a private chamber 3 sections away, Kalith was among those recalculating. She was reviewing the footage of my lift on a private display, her eyes tracking my movement with an intensity that had nothing to do with tactical assessment. She watched the moment I lifted the replica, watched it 17 times in the first hour, watched the way my grip settled naturally on the handle, the smooth efficiency of the overhead extension, the complete absence of trembling or strain. And she was beginning to question everything her species had taught her about strength, superiority, and the foundation of galactic hierarchy. I didn't know any of that yet. All I knew was that I'd accidentally become dangerous, and that danger had a way of attracting predators. The review committee cleared my testing results within 9 hours. No fraud detected, no equipment malfunction. Human physiology, unmodified, had simply exceeded established performance parameters by a margin that forced complete reassessment of human athletic potential, and by extension, human labor capability and resource extraction operations. The tournament committee's official statement was carefully neutral. Testing results are unprecedented and will be recorded for analysis regarding tournament outcome implications, which meant they were terrified. I was given provisional advancement to elimination rounds pending final committee approval. I was also told to remain within the delegation quarters pending investigation into whether Earth had concealed genetic modification programs in our initial contact reports. I was essentially confined, monitored, observed. I wasn't expecting Kalith to appear in the delegation common area at 2200 station time, moving with the casual authority of someone whose presence required no announcement or permission. She wore civilian attire, now form-fitting, bioadaptive fabric that revealed the elegant architecture of her musculature. Still deeply blue, but somehow more luminous without the armor. Her golden eyes found me immediately. Marcus Veldrin, she said. Not a question, a statement of confirmed identity. Director Torrens, who had been reviewing contract cancellations on a data tablet, straightened with visible alarm. Champion Kalith Vare, this is an unexpected. I'm aware of protocol violations. Kalith interrupted, her attention never leaving me. I'm exercising my right as tournament competitor to conduct technical analysis with other competitors. It's standard preparation procedure under Competition Regulation 7-4. The lie was transparent, delivered with absolute authority. Torrens, confronted with a galactic champion from a major species with military backing, had no practical grounds to refuse. I'll be in the secondary chamber, Torrens said, excusing herself with obvious reluctance and equally obvious awareness that she had no real choice. Kalith settled into the seat across from me with movements that were economical, precise, practiced. This close, the scale differential became apparent. She was taller by 3 inches, but her frame was built so precisely that she didn't feel larger. She felt concentrated, distilled into her most efficient form. Your results create complications, she said without preamble. I noticed, I replied. Didn't seem to bother you during the testing, though. Her golden eyes flickered with what might have been amusement. I wasn't present during your preliminary testing. No, but you've seen the replays. Everyone has. 17 times, she admitted, and something in that admission felt significant. You're here because those replays mean something to me specifically. She studied me with the intensity of someone examining a structural problem that might collapse without warning. My species believes strength is singular, she finally said. It compounds. A stronger individual defeats a weaker one. This determines hierarchy, establishes position within military structure, defines leadership capability. We have organized ourselves around this principle for 2,700 years. My engineering brain couldn't help itself. That's not actually how biology works. She leaned forward and I felt the weight of her attention like physical pressure. Explain. So I did. I talked about structural principles, about how Earth's 1.0 standard gravity had shaped human muscular development differently than her species' 1.47 g had shaped theirs. I discussed lever arms and insertion points and the particular advantage humans had evolved for tool manipulation, precision grip, combined with endurance strength rather than burst power. I pulled up holographic schematics on the common area display showing force vector distributions, mechanical advantage calculations, the physics of why smaller beings with superior leverage could overcome larger beings with greater absolute strength. She listened without interrupting, her golden eyes never leaving my face. And as I spoke, I became aware of the intimacy of the conversation. We were discussing strength, but it was a discussion that revealed how differently we understood the universe. When I finished, she was silent for 17 seconds. I counted. If what you're describing is accurate, she said carefully, each word chosen with precision, then the graviton mall's resistance isn't inherent to the weapon. It's circumstantial to the wielder. She paused, her fingers absently tracing the edge of her armor's mall symbol crest. When I hold it, the weapon feels warm, responsive. I always attributed that to its power recognizing worthiness. Maybe, I acknowledge, maybe your species' physiology shaped the design parameters. Create something perfectly adapted to one set of biological conditions, and you've potentially created something vulnerable to organisms from different evolutionary paths. Her expression shifted. Something flickered across her features that looked like recognition, but deeper. Existential recognition. I've never considered that possibility, she said quietly. Your species hasn't needed to, I replied. You've had a 2,700-year head start on establishing galactic hierarchy. No one's challenged the fundamental assumptions. She stood abruptly, and I tracked the movement, noting how her weight balanced with perfect economy. The preliminary testing is concluded, she said, returning to formal protocol with visible effort. The elimination rounds begin in 36 hours. I wanted to understand what you are before we potentially face each other in competition. And, I asked. I still don't understand, she admitted, and it seemed to cost her something to say it. Her golden eyes met mine directly. That's inconvenient. She left without further explanation, moving with the same precise grace she'd arrived with. I sat alone in the common area thinking about context and advantage, about how something that seemed impossible suddenly became logical when viewed from a different angle. What I didn't know was that Kalith returned to her private quarters and spent the next 6 hours reviewing basic human physiology documentation, studying Earth's gravity specifications, reading biomechanical analyses with the intensity of a military strategist, reviewing enemy fortifications. She was trying to understand me systematically, which meant she was failing to acknowledge that the problem was no longer intellectual. It had become personal, and in 3 days, someone would try to kill me because of it. Day 4 arrived with the kind of silence that precedes violence. I should have recognized it. 4 years of military service had taught me to read the texture of danger in the air, the way atmospheric pressure shifts before a storm. But I was distracted by the elimination bracket announcements by Director Torrens, pacing the delegation quarters like a caged predator, by the 17 new trade cancellation notices that had arrived overnight. I was distracted by thinking about golden eyes and the way Kalith's voice had sounded when she admitted she didn't understand me. So I missed the signs until the combat drone was already in my quarters. I woke to movement, not sound. The thing was designed for silent operation, but the displacement of air as something large shifted position in the darkness. My hand reached for the emergency beacon mounted beside my sleeping platform, even as I rolled sideways, and that reflex saved my life. The drone's plasma blade carved through the space my chest had occupied 0.3 seconds earlier, superheated air crackling where my sternum should have been. The weapon cauterized as it cut, designed to leave minimal forensic evidence. Professional hardware. Military grade. I hit the floor and kept rolling my mind, already mapping the room geometry in 3 dimensions. Sleeping platform to my left, storage units against the far wall, atmospheric processor housing to my right. Cover options limited. The drone moved like liquid metal, its form shifting to optimize for the confined space, triple-jointed limbs, adjusting angles that shouldn't have been anatomically possible. I grabbed the nearest storage unit, reinforced composite, maybe 40 kilograms, and used it to block the entrance to the sleeping alcove. Not much of a barrier, but it bought me 2 seconds to trigger the emergency beacon. The beacon's activation signal pulsed through the station network with a priority override that should have brought security within 30 seconds. Should have. The drone pulled the storage unit from my hands with force that sent me stumbling backward. Its optical sensors tracked me with the cold efficiency of targeting software color-shifting skin, adapting to match the shadows. Definitely Kreshka design, Shadow Hunter class, the kind of hardware you deployed when you wanted someone eliminated with zero attribution. I was going to die in my sleeping quarters, killed by a weapon I couldn't fight with furniture, and the emergency beacon's 53-second response delay suddenly felt like geological time. The door to my quarters exploded inward. Not opened, not breached, exploded. The reinforced composite frame fractured with enough kinetic force to send shrapnel across the room in an expanding cloud of debris. Through the smoke and ionized air came Dr. Zenith Korvalin Vexarioi, biophysics researcher, holding what appeared to be a jury-rigged electromagnetic pulse device that was sparking and dying in her hands. Veldrin, her voice carried the sharp urgency of someone who'd been running. Shadow Hunter drone move. She was bleeding from her left shoulder, dark Vexarii blood soaking through her lab coat in spreading patterns. The drone pivoted toward this new threat with predatory focused plasma blade adjusting its resonance frequency. I didn't think. Thinking takes time. I acted on 12 years of engineering instinct and grabbed the magnetic field generator I'd been using to analyze the replica mall's electromagnetic signature. 30 kilograms of diagnostic equipment designed for precision measurements, not combat, but mass was mass, and momentum was momentum. I threw it. The generator hit the drone mid-lunge, disrupting its trajectory just enough that its blade missed Dr. Zenith's throat by centimeters. She rolled with the kind of trained efficiency that suggested military background, came up with a broken piece of my doorframe, and drove it into the drone's sensor cluster with savage precision. Then the ceiling vent cover crashed inward, and Kalith dropped through, moving like controlled violence given form. She didn't hesitate, didn't assess, didn't announce herself. She simply engaged her hands already positioned in strike formation that spoke of decades of martial training. The drone was fast, but Kalith was faster. Her superior reflexes tracking its movements with the predictive capability of someone who'd fought adaptive opponents. The combat sequence lasted maybe 11 seconds. It felt like hours compressed into heartbeats of crystallized intensity. Kalith moved through the confined space with an economy of motion that was almost beautiful. Each strike calibrated to maximum efficiency, each defensive position flowing into the next offensive opportunity. The drone nearly killed her. Its blade came up from an angle that shouldn't have been physically possible given its previous position, the kind of maneuver that only worked with triple-jointed anatomy. The superheated edge tracked toward the major arteries in Kalith's neck with targeting precision. I was already moving. The broken storage unit was still within reach, and I used it to extend my effective range, creating a new obstacle in the drone's trajectory that its combat algorithms hadn't predicted. It was enough. Kalith spun into the opening I'd created, and her finishing strike was efficient and final. The drone collapsed its form, losing cohesion as critical systems failed. The room fell silent except for our breathing. Harsh elevated the sound of organic systems pushed beyond normal operational parameters. Kalith stood breathing hard, her golden eyes blazing with an intensity that had nothing to do with exertion and everything to do with contained fury. Then she looked at me with an expression I couldn't parse. "Are you damaged?" Her voice was steady despite her elevated respiratory rate. "No." I managed to keep my own voice relatively controlled. "You saved my life." "Yes." She said it like acknowledgement of a tactical situation rather than a significant statement. But her hands were shaking. She noticed stilled them through visible force of will, and the control required for that small gesture spoke volumes. That's when station security finally arrived. The official explanation emerged over the following 12 hours. A criminal element had attempted assassination, possibly third-party contractors attempting to influence tournament outcomes by eliminating a significant competitor. The drone carried no identification. Its weapons were generic, unregistered. The investigation would be thorough and impartial. What the investigation wouldn't answer was who had authorized station security access codes, who had disabled monitoring systems in my quarters specifically, who had investment in eliminating the human threat to establish galactic hierarchies before the elimination rounds even began. Kalith didn't leave my presence while security processed the scene. She stood against the wall, ostensibly observing the investigation, but her focus was entirely on me. When Director Torrens returned and found Kalith inside my quarters, the diplomatic complications were immediate. I was conducting competitor analysis, Kalith said with that same bland authority she'd used during her first visit. The assassination attempt occurred during that analysis. I remained for security purposes. No one challenged her version. She was a galactic champion from a major species with military backing. She had nothing to gain from lying about saving a human competitor's life. In fact, her species looked protective, honorable, civilized, diplomatic advantage through humanitarian action. After security departed, Kalith finally approached me directly. We were alone in what remained of my quarters, surrounded by the debris of violence. "Someone wanted you eliminated before the finals," she said quietly. "That's the only logical explanation for deployment of Kreshka hardware. Your performance in preliminary testing threatens economic structures. Species with investment in maintaining current resource hierarchies cannot afford your advancement. So your government might be involved," I said. She didn't flinch. "Possibly, not directly, but my species benefits from the economic structures your emergence threatens. There are partnerships agreements, centuries of established trade relationships. My leadership might not have authorized assassination, but they might have been aware of it." I understood what that admission cost her. She was acknowledging that her entire species' institutional structure might be complicit in attempted murder for profit margin protection. "There's more," she continued and pulled a data chip from her armor. "Dr. Zenith Korvalan brought this, before she collapsed from blood loss." Doctor. Zenith had been taken to medical facilities, her shoulder wound serious but survivable. But she'd managed to hand off the chip during the chaos, pressed it into my palm with fingers that trembled from shock and blood loss. "Graviton suppression protocol," she'd whispered. "They designed it. 900 years, all rigged." Kalith and I retreated to a decommissioned cargo bay that she accessed through security privileges no one had revoked yet. The bay was scheduled for atmospheric recycling, which meant monitoring systems were offline, and we had maybe 6 hours before maintenance crews arrived. She plugged the chip into a portable display unit, and Dr. Zenith's data unfolded in holographic complexity. The Graviton Mall had been forged 850 years ago by a coalition that would eventually become the current cartel structure. The core material wasn't just collapsed matter alloy. It was reactive collapsed matter alloy engineered to respond to specific bioelectric signature frequencies. Zephyrian neuromuscular systems operated in the 52 to 61 Hz range. The Mall was calibrated to recognize and accept that frequency band. When a Zephyrian lifted it, the core's resistance protocols remained dormant. The weapon allowed itself to be wielded. Human neuromuscular systems, however, operated in the 34 to 42 Hz range, outside the calibration parameters entirely. When I lifted the replica, the core's recognition protocols failed to activate. The resistance systems never engaged. I wasn't lifting a weapon that accepted me as worthy. I was lifting a weapon that didn't recognize me as a valid test subject at all. "The warmth the Mall generates when Zephyrians hold it," I said, connecting the dots. "That's biometric recognition activating. The electromagnetic fields I mentioned weren't just theory, they were the actual mechanism." Kalith stared at the holographic data with an expression that looked like watching her foundational beliefs crystallize and shatter simultaneously. "My species built supremacy on a rigged test," she said quietly. 2,700 years of hierarchy based on a weapon designed to validate us specifically. The economic data was worse. $51 trillion in cartel contracts threatened by human emergence. Projections showing human labor efficiency and microgravity fabrication operation running 41% higher than Vexarii standards. Models predicting 20-year timeline to human resource independence if advancement continued unchecked. And buried in encrypted communications, the authorization chains. Tertiary asset deployment approved. Timeline day 4 sleep cycle. Target Veldrin Marcus. Collateral damage acceptable if necessary for objective completion. Tertiary assets, I said, reading the language. "I'm not even worth primary assassination protocols." Kalith didn't smile at the dark humor. She was reading through the authorization chains, and I watched her expression change as she found what she was looking for. Matriarch Varus, digital signature present, approval granted through proxy authorization. Her mother. "The High Command knew," Kalith said, her voice carrying something between grief and rage. "They didn't order directly. They used third-party contractors, maintained plausible deniability. But they knew. They approved." I waited watching her process what betrayal felt like when it came from institutional structures you'd been trained to trust without question. I can access the full authorization records, she finally said. I have security clearance to the Defense Archives. I can download the complete decision chains, prove the conspiracy beyond any reasonable doubt. That's treason, I said quietly. Your government will exile you. She looked at me, then her golden eyes carrying an intensity that felt like standing too close to a star. I know, I'm doing it anyway. Calith, not for humanity, she interrupted, not for tournament results or political advantage. I'm doing it because my entire species' understanding of strength is built on a lie I can't unknow, and because you're the first as being who's ever made me question whether strength without integrity means anything at all. She moved closer in the dim cargo bay, close enough that I could see the fine patterns in her sapphire skin, the way her musculature tensed with contained emotion. Is this normal for humans? She asked, her voice carrying something I'd never heard from her before. Uncertainty. Physical contact during espionage activities. Not in the manual, I said, but I left my manual on Enceladus. She kissed me then, and it was nothing like theoretical cross-species interaction protocols. It was specific to us. Her greater height requiring me to reach upward, her superior strength deliberately restrained, so the contact was gentle rather than overwhelming. I could feel the tension in her shoulders, the active muscular control required to calibrate her touch. When we separated, she was still holding Dr. Zenith's data chip. Tomorrow I retrieve the conspiracy documentation, she said, the day after we expose it. Then the finals happen, and we face each other knowing everything has changed. Does it change the match? I asked. Everything changes the match, she said. But that's between the arena and us. Right now, the only thing that matters is that you understand I'm choosing this. Not my species' loyalty, not my duty. This. She left before I could respond, moving back through the cargo systems with practiced efficiency, already planning her own betrayal. Over the next 48 hours, Calith accessed Zephyrian command networks, using security privileges that hadn't been revoked yet. She found the authorization chains buried in committee vote records, found her mother's digital signature on human threat mitigation approval, found communications proving that High Command had known about the assassination plot and tacitly sanctioned it. She copied everything, and approximately 55 hours before the championship finals, she delivered it to me in that same cargo bay, her movements no longer precise with control, but fractured with emotion she'd spent 28 years training herself not to feel. My species cannot know I provided this, she said. It was statement of fact, not plea for protection. If exposure comes, it has to come through Earth's diplomatic channels. Anyone but me. That protects you, I asked, though I already knew the answer. No, she said simply. But it protects the possibility that my species can face what they did and choose differently. I'm not protecting myself, Marcus. I'm protecting the chance that my leadership can acknowledge this and become something better. I could see it now. What she called loyalty and what she was experiencing were becoming irreconcilable. She was trying to save both me and the possibility of her species' evolution. Dr. Zenith had one more revelation before she was moved to secure medical isolation. The neutral arbiter had known about the graviton engineering for 340 years. Tournament sanctioning board records showed awareness without intervention policy. The entire authority structure had chosen institutional stability over truth. We're not just exposing the cartel, I said, reading through the final data layers. We're proving the arbiter chose profit over justice for 3 centuries. Yes, Calith said quietly. Which means when we step into that arena, we're not fighting each other. We're fighting everything that created the conditions for this tournament to exist. In the darkness of that cargo bay, with the galaxy spread out beyond the hull and 2 civilizations worth of lies compressed into holographic data between us, we made a choice that neither of our species would understand. We chose each other over everything else. And tomorrow we would have to prove that choice meant something. The evidence went live through Earth's encrypted diplomatic channels at 0400 station time on day 6. By 0430, the galactic feeds had erupted. I watched it unfold from the delegation quarters, Director Torrens beside me, both of us knowing that we'd just detonated something far larger than a tournament scandal. The holographic displays showed response cascading across 47 star systems in real time. Emergency sessions convening. Trade networks freezing. Diplomatic channels overloading with priority traffic. The data was irrefutable. Authorization chains proving cartel coordination. Economic projections showing 51 trillion in threatened contracts. communications logs demonstrating Zephyrian high command knowledge of assassination protocols, and buried in the technical specifications, the truth about the Graviton Mall, 850 years of engineered supremacy, a test designed to validate the species who created it. The neutral arbiter's 340-year silence was perhaps the worst revelation. The crystalline being who'd presided over 7 centuries of tournaments had known the mall was rigged and chosen institutional stability over truth. The review process took 48 hours. I was sequestered in secure quarters with legal representation from Earth's diplomatic corps. Kalith was similarly isolated within Zephyrian delegations, space kept separate for her protection, though I understood the implication. She was potentially being held accountable for her species' government's complicity, even though she'd been the one to expose it. The hearings were conducted in closed session, but the conclusions were broadcast across every feed in known space. The conspiracy was determined to be institutional coordination across multiple species. The assassination attempt was classified as premeditated elimination with economic motivation. Cartel members face sanctions, resource access limitations, exclusion from future tournament cycles. Zephyrian High Command faced sanctions as well, pending internal investigation and governance review. Matriarch Varys was forced to resign from military command, her digital signature on the authorization chains ending a 40-year career in a single document release. But my advancement in the tournament was deemed legitimate. My competition could continue. The finals would proceed. On the evening of Day 7, Director Torrens entered my quarters with the expression of someone carrying a burden they wish they could set down. "You can withdraw," she said without preamble. "The committee has offered that option. We've achieved everything we needed politically. Exposed the conspiracy, proved human capability, established our position. You don't have to risk your life in that arena tomorrow." I was standing at the viewport watching the gas giant's atmospheric storms churn in orange and cream patterns against the black. "What happens to Kalith if I withdraw?" Torrens was silent for 17 seconds. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of someone who'd calculated costs in human lives for too long. "Exile. Her government will distance themselves from her actions. Even if Zephyros survives the sanctions, there's no path for her to return to military structure. She betrayed her command for you, Marcus. If you don't fight in 2 days, it was for nothing." I turned from the viewport. "Then I'm competing." She studied me with those gray eyes that had seen too much. "You understand what you're choosing. That arena in 2 days isn't about strength anymore. It's about whether love across species boundaries can survive when the entire galaxy is watching for you to fail." "I know." She left without further argument, but the weight of her words settled over me like the increased gravity I'd felt descending to Helix 7. 30 million lives depending on resource contracts. 2 civilizations worth of lies finally exposed. And one Zephyrian warrior who'd thrown away everything she'd been trained to value because I'd shown her that strength without choice was just expensive weakness. 2 mornings later, I learned that Kalith had been released from diplomatic sequestration. She'd been cleared of personal culpability. The decisions were institutional, above her authorization level. But the implication was clear in every official statement. She was no longer truly part of her species' political structure. She was free. She was also entirely alone. I saw her in the amphitheater before the match began, standing on the champion's platform in full ceremonial armor. The dual moon crest of Zephyros still marked her breastplate, but I wondered if she felt the weight of that symbol differently now. Her golden eyes found mine across the arena floor, and something in her expression broke open. Raw, unguarded. The complete absence of the military composure she'd maintained since we'd met. The crowd was different from opening ceremonies. The political context had transformed the match from sport into referendum. Humans watching to see if our species' entry into galactic competition would be validated or crushed. Cartel species watching to see if their supremacy would be reasserted despite the exposed conspiracy. Neutral species watching to see what strength actually meant when lies were stripped away. 2.6 trillion beings, and in that moment I only saw her. The match protocols were standard elimination format. Continue until one competitor was unable to continue or yielded surrender. Serious injury was within bounds. Death was technically prohibited, but enforcement was minimal if both competitors consented to lethal engagement. I stepped onto the arena floor and the noise of the crowd faded into white sound, atmospheric pressure, the background hum of existence. Kalith moved toward me with that same measured stride, but I could see the difference now. She wasn't moving as the champion of her species. She was moving as herself, and the distinction was everything. We met in the center of the arena. Traditional opening stance formal acknowledgement. Her eyes met mine, and in that fraction of a second, we had an entire conversation without words. Then the match began. Phase 1 was testing. She moved first using her superior speed and combat training to establish tempo. I responded with structural positioning using the arena geometry I'd mapped during warm-up. The floor had 0.4 centimeter variance from thermal expansion patterns. Minimal, but everything mattered at this level. We traded 11 strikes in the first 90 seconds. No significant damage. Both of us analyzing, learning, adapting in real time. The crowd was beginning to understand this wasn't a standard combat sequence. We were having a dialogue written in movement and response in leverage and counterpoint. Phase 2 escalated. Kalith exploited her reach advantage, her reflexes creating combinations I had to predict rather than react to. But I had the arena geometry advantage, knew where the thermal expansion created micro variations in attraction. I used those variations to redirect her momentum to create positioning that turned her strength into excess rather than advantage. 6 minutes in mid-combination, she spoke. "You're analyzing floor construction during combat." I dodged her next strike by 0.3 centimeters. Multitasking. Her response might have been a laugh or a battle cry. With Kalith, the distinction was academic. Phase 3 was the first test. Her breathing shifted, deliberate, controlled. She deliberately exposed her left flank. Classic vulnerability, the kind you only create if you're testing your opponent's honor versus their tactical judgment. I saw the opening, calculated the strike angle, predicted 73% probability of disabling her shoulder joint if I committed fully. I repositioned to neutral instead. Her golden eyes showed shock, then something deeper. Respect, maybe. Recognition that I'd made a choice that cost me tactical advantage. Phase 4 was my turn. I created an opening using the 0.4 centimeter floor variance, a controlled fall that looked like lost balance but was calculated positioning. It left me vulnerable to a finishing strike that would end the match with one blow. Kalith saw it, lined up the strike. Her form was perfect, her trajectory optimized, and in the microsecond before impact, I saw her make the same choice I had. She pulled the strike. It connected hard enough to hurt the kind of pain that would leave bruises for weeks, but it was deliberately restrained. Not enough to disable. Not enough to end. I felt the impact radiate through my ribs and understood. We were both fighting the same battle now. Not against each other, against everything that expected us to prove supremacy through domination. Phase 5 came at 12 minutes, both of us exhausted. The physical demands of combat at this intensity weren't sustainable indefinitely. Muscles were depleting, energy reserves, neural systems were approaching overload, and the margin for error was collapsing towards zero. Kalith managed to get me in a floor pin using her gravity advantage to compress me against the arena surface. Traditional combat theory said I should tap out, yield, accept defeat with honor, and minimize injury. Instead, I looked up at her face. Her sapphire skin was darker with exertion. Her golden eyes locked on mine with an intensity that had nothing to do with the fight and everything to do with the choice we were both facing. I could see the question she was asking without words. The same question I'd been asking myself since that first conversation in the delegation quarters. Do we keep fighting what everyone expects? Or do we choose what we actually want? She lifted me up instead of pressing down. Released the hold and stepped back. Extended her hand not as an opponent offering acknowledgement of defeat, but as a partner offering acknowledgement of something far more significant. I took her hand. We stood in the center of the arena, fingers interlaced, and the sound that erupted from 2.6 trillion spectators was something between applause and revelation. The noise of paradigm shifting, of foundational assumptions, crumbling of the galaxy, watching two beings redefine what victory could mean. The neutral arbiter's crystalline form shifted through several states of matter before stabilizing enough to speak. 47 seconds of silence while the ancient being processed what it was witnessing. When the voice finally came, it resonated through every frequency simultaneously. Combat has concluded without elimination. Neither competitor has yielded. Neither is unable to continue. Both have demonstrated supreme capability. Both have demonstrated supreme restraint. The pause stretched longer this time. 53 seconds of the arbiter's form cycling through colors I didn't have names for. This is the first occurrence in 723 tournament cycles where competitors have mutually chosen to redefine victory parameters rather than accept established competitive frameworks. This tournament cannot designate a single victor when the competitors themselves have evolved beyond the measurement systems. Another pause. The crystalline being seemed to be conferring with itself across multiple dimensions. This will be recorded as adaptive evolution of competitive paradigm. The match is concluded. Both competitors are recognized as having transcended traditional victory conditions. The arena erupted again, but this time the sound was different. Not celebration, not disappointment. Something closer to uncertainty transforming into possibility. I looked at Kayla still holding her hand and saw tears tracking down her sapphire skin. The first time I'd seen her cry. The first time she'd allowed herself to feel without the filter of military conditioning. "Is this it?" she asked quietly, her voice barely audible under the crowd noise. And I understood she was asking the same question she'd asked 6 months from now in an ancestral chamber on Zephyros when we'd be holding the Graviton Mall together. "This is exactly it," I said. The immediate aftermath was chaos of political proportions. Cartel members issued denials while sanctions were being implemented. The Neutral Arbiters Committee announced restructuring protocols across 17 species. Zephyrian High Command began internal investigations that would take years to complete. Earth's diplomatic representatives suddenly found themselves negotiating from a position of strength nobody had anticipated. Not full Tier 1 cartel voting rights that would have been unrealistic, but Tier 2 status with pathway to advancement, real power in resource allocation decisions. Kalith was offered a position as cultural liaison between Zephyros and Earth, diplomatic language for polite exile. She would represent her species' interests while being functionally separate from military command structure. It was acknowledgement and banishment combined, wrapped in official protocols. Her mother sent a private message. Audio only, no visual. "Kalith, you chose integrity over hierarchy. I spent 40 years building a career on systems I never questioned. You question everything in 8 days. Your father would be proud. I am processing this, but not surprised. Not forgiveness, not acceptance, but not complete rejection either. It was the beginning of something maybe, the possibility of evolution." 3 years later, standing in that ancestral chamber on Zephyros with Kalith beside me, and the Graviton Mall warm under our shared grip, I could trace the line from that moment to this one. The integration hadn't been simple. The first 2 months on Zephyros had been difficult, her species viewing me with suspicion that oscillated between scientific curiosity and threat assessment. Cultural adaptation had required patience from both of us, learning when to push, when to accommodate, when to simply exist in the discomfort of difference. Matriarch Varus had watched me for 84 hours before performing the traditional kinship acceptance ritual. The ceremony involved ritual combat, shared meals prepared according to specific protocols, and a formal declaration before the family archive that I was being granted entry into their ancestral structure. "You dismantled my daughter's foundational beliefs in 8 days, she'd said during the ritual. "You could have used that vulnerability. You chose to protect it instead. That is strength my species has forgotten how to recognize." Now, lifting the Graviton Mall one-handed in that same chamber, I felt its warmth respond to my bioelectric frequency. Not rejection, not even acceptance. Something closer to recognition that the old parameters no longer applied. Kalith took the Mall from me, raised it overhead in the Zephyrian partnership gesture. The motion was ceremonial ancient, but its meaning had been transformed by context. Together we carried it from the chamber, the weight that had once been impossible now distributed between us. We passed Matriarch Varus in the corridor. She nodded to me, subtle, brief, but the first direct acknowledgement she'd given since the kinship ritual. Among her people, such gestures carried weight that humans expressed through paragraphs. "Was that approval?" I asked Kalith as we continued down the corridor. "Among my people, a matriarch's nod equals approximately 10 human embraces in emotional significance," she said. Her tone was serious, but I could see the amusement in her golden eyes. "I'll take it." We emerged into the garden courtyard where Zephyrus's twin suns were setting in synchronized patterns, painting the sky in colors that Earth's single star could never produce. The light caught the mall's iridescent surface, and for a moment the weapon looked less like a tool of dominance and more like what it had become, a symbol of how strength could evolve when paired with the willingness to question what you'd been taught. "Is this it?" Kalith asked again, echoing the question from the arena 3 years ago. I looked at her, at the scars she'd earned defending choices that cost her everything. Her species valued it the way she held herself, now still powerful, still precise, but no longer compressed into the shape her military conditioning had demanded. "Humans ask existential questions casually," I said. "Your species trains for 40 years before approaching philosophical uncertainty. I do it Tuesday mornings." This time she did laugh. Full unguarded, the sound of someone who'd learned that strength and vulnerability weren't opposites, but complementary forces. Above us, the twin suns continued their descent. The mall rested between us, its weight unchanged, but its meaning entirely redefined. And across the galaxy, 94 cross-species partnerships had been registered in the 3 years since we'd stood hand in hand in that arena. Tournament Cycle 724 was scheduled to begin in 6 months with new protocols that scored competitive restraint equally with competitive dominance. The arbiters had been restructured. The cartel had been forced to accept Tier 2 human representation. Zephyrian High Command had implemented transparency requirements that would have been unthinkable 4 years ago. None of it was perfect. None of it was complete. But it was movement in a direction that hadn't existed before two beings from different worlds chose each other over systems designed to keep them separate. Here's what 8 days in a rigged hammer taught me about strength. It's not what you can lift. It's what you choose to carry. The Graviton Mall was never measuring our capability. It was measuring our willingness to believe that capability equaled supremacy. That strength was singular, absolute, unchallengeable. That the beings who could lift the heaviest weight deserved to define what mattered. Caliph showed me that questioning your foundational beliefs takes more courage than defending them. That betraying a corrupt system in service of truth requires strength that no physical test can measure. That choosing love, when your entire civilization tells you its weakness, might be the strongest choice anyone can make. And I showed her, or maybe we showed each other, that humans aren't special because we're stronger, or smarter, or more capable than other species. We're just different enough that our presence forces questions that comfortable hierarchies would prefer remained unasked. 3 years forward from that match, humanity holds Tier 2 cartel status with pathway to full voting rights. The celestial apex continues, but the rules have changed. Competitors now understand that winning and dominating aren't synonyms, that the strongest outcome might be the one where both fighters walk away having chosen something better than victory. And that Zephyrian warrior who threw away 28 years of military conditioning in 8 days, we're still here, still teaching each other, still proving that the strongest choice you can make is to question what you were taught strength means. The mall sits in her family's archive now, its electromagnetic signature attuned to both our frequencies. A weapon designed to validate supremacy transformed into evidence that strength without integrity is just expensive weakness. We lift it together sometimes when the twin suns set and the galaxy feels vast and indifferent. Feeling its warmth, respond to our combined bioelectric frequencies, to the choice we made, and continue making every day we stay together despite every system designed to keep us apart. 294 kilograms of collapsed matter alloy. 8 days from stranger to revolutionary. 3 years building something that has no name in either of our languages. And every time we lift that mall, we're not proving we're strong enough to carry it. We're proving we're strong enough to question why anyone thought they needed to. That's the real weight, the one that matters, the one we choose to bear together.